Hello everyone. Before we start our session, let us have a quick intro about the program and the session and about this graduate network. Thank you. Thank you for that quick presentation. Now let's start our session. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final session of the WFGN Global Interactive Summit 2026. This session has, I think, the best title of the entire program. Seaweed is not just seaweed. Let me tell you why the title matters. For most of human history, seaweed has been the thing we step on the beach, the slippery stuff tangled around our ankles, a nuisance washed up around after a storm. In much of the world, it has been treated as waste, something without value, without a name, without a future.
For a long time, seaweed has been seen as little more than a marine plant, something washed up on the shore or a minor ingredient tucked into niche cuisine. But today, seaweed sits at the center of most exciting development in the global blue economy. It is a sustainable food source, a raw material for hydrocolloid like agar, alginate, and carrageenan used across the food and pharmaceutical industries, a promising input for bioplastic and biostimulants, a tool for carbon sequestration and blue carbon strategy, and a genuine livelihood opportunity for coastal communities, particularly for women. Through mariculture, this topic matters because mariculture, the cultivation of marine organisms in coastal or open water environment, represent one of the most fastest growing and most environmentally efficient segment of the blue economy.
Thank you, Kashvi. Seaweed as an organism grows without soil, without fresh water, without fertilizer, and without competing for a single inch of farmland. It grows faster than almost any plant on earth. It draws carbon out of water as it grows. It cleans the sea it lives in, and inside it sits an extraordinary chemistry. The gels that set our deserts and hold our medicine together, the sugar being studied for cancer and inflammation, the compounds that feed our soil and our animals, the fibers that may one day replace the plastic in our very hands. So the truth is, seaweed was never just seaweed. It is food, it is a medicine, a fertilizer, a fuel. It is in packaging, it is in our livelihood, and it has will and I believe it will help us in climate action. It is one organism wearing a dozen different futures at once. And the only reason we call it just seaweed is that we have not been paying attention. This is what today's session is all about. Over the next 2 hours, we will travel from the seaweed farms of Canada and the coastlines of Scotland into the molecules inside brown algae to the industrial science of marine polysaccharides and all the way to a plate of seaweed noodles in Kerala. Four speakers, four different ways of seeing the same organism. And by the end, I hope none of us will ever look at that slippery stuff on the beach the same way again. So let's begin. Before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Kirstana Balamurugan. Most people call me Key, and I'll be a host for this final session. I'm a plant molecular biotechnology by training, but I hold a master's in plant genetics and crop improvement from the John Innes Centre and the University of East Anglia in Norwich, UK, where my research has focused on how plants sense and survive stress at a molecular level. The signaling that tells a plant when it's too cold, too dry, too salty, and how it responds. But my curiosity has never stayed on land. I'm a research coordinator with the Women Fisheries Graduate Network, and my work has increasingly drawn me towards the sea, into the circular bioeconomy, into algal biomass and biofuels, and into the question of how marine resources can be used sustainably. So, this session, honestly, is a personal delight because I have long believed that seaweed is one of the most underestimated organisms in this planet. And tonight, I get to sit and learn from four people who have proven it. Before we begin our session, it is my pleasure and honor to be your host with my co host, Kashvi Kajal.
Thank you, Ki. Hello, everyone. I'm Kashvi Kazil from Bihar, India. I'm one of the co-hosts of this session. I hold a master degree in Joint Master of Science in Aquaculture, Environment and Society from University of Highland and Islands, Scotland, UK. I did my bachelor's in Fisheries Science from Dr. Rajendra Prasad Central Agriculture University, Bhusa, Bihar, India. I belong to a completely landlocked place where seaweed was just limited to books until I went to a farm in Scotland and France, which changed everything. For the first time, I tried seaweed snacks, wraps, and even soaps at a Scottish Association for Marine Sciences, which gave me opportunity to attend a lot of seaweed conferences in Scotland. I this session, I believe that important for everyone, including me. I'm also going to learn a lot. So begin the session. I would like to invite our first speaker of this session, which asks a question that sits underneath everything else tonight. How do you build the industry from scratch? It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Smith, project lead of the Canadian Seaweed Industry Network from Victoria, British Columbia. Mark works to unite Canada's seaweed sector, in his own words, from coast to coast, bringing together farmer, researcher, policymaker, indigenous communities, and entrepreneur into a single shared vision. His background is in the blue economy, regenerative agriculture, innovation, and technology. He has also worked with the Pacific Seaweed Industry Association, where his focus sits at the fascinating intersection of ocean health, economic development, and truth and reconciliation with indigenous communities. He chaired the British Columbia government task force on the sustainable agriculture and agri-tech and made sure seaweed and the blue economy were written into his recommendation. He also hosts a podcast, The Ocean Age, talking this conversation around the world. What Mark understands is that crop is not an industry. An industry needs network, partnership, policy, investment, and trust. And he is building all of them. Please join me in welcoming Mark Smith. The virtual platform is yours.
Great. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. And good morning, greetings from the west coast of Canada, where it's a little earlier for me than it is for the rest of you. But thrilled to be here and thank you for the opportunity. So, as was nicely introduced, and thank you for covering that all off. Again, my name is Mark Smith, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Pacific Seaweed Industry Association, and I also lead the Canadian Seaweed Network, which we'll talk about in a bit. We represent a sector that is very much at the beginning, still emerging, but one that we believe, which has already been alluded to a number of times on this introductory part, has enormous potential. Not simply because of the seaweed, but because seaweed sits at the intersection of climate, food systems, indigenous leadership, coastal economies, biotechnology, and ocean innovation. And for those, again, who don't have context into the Canadian landscape, this is very much a First Nations and Indigenous-led sector. Always has been. Nations here have been on the water since time memorial, and we are privileged on a daily basis to work with a number of those nations to explore those opportunities. And our work simply really isn't about growing more seaweed. It's about growing an ecosystem that's going to allow the industry to succeed. And why seaweed? I think a key hit on it nicely is that there's a whole host of opportunities within that from both a product context and opportunity. But we see a bigger piece. And quite frankly, we think some of those larger global priorities are things like climate resilience, coastal economic diversification, food security, regenerative agriculture, the connectivity to traditional agriculture on the land at the intersection of the ocean holds hosts of opportunities. Regenerative agriculture that we've just spoken about, biomanufacturing, sustainable materials is very exciting. I think before I really kind of delve into product specific, one of the things we always have a bit of a, I hate to use the word disclaimer, but I'm going to use that word, is that, in specifically in the North American context, the biomass and seaweed growth at scale is really not there. So in a lot of those innovation contexts where we believe we're doing some innovative approaches where we're starting to marry products with, for example, wood fiber that was left on the forest floor from the forest sector that may not historically have had a use, and marrying that with a seaweed variety to create materials such as packaging and textiles and pieces like that. So that's very exciting. Ecosystem restoration. I always say we really work at the intersection of ocean health, social and community license, and economic development. And as the guy who leads the industry or trying to put together the industry, that might sound a little backwards in that we've put the economic development emphasis at the end. The reality is we know that if the ocean is in a healthy place and we don't have the quote unquote community buy-in, we're never going to achieve the economic outcomes that we believe the opportunity are. And when I say the economic outputs, and I start talking about building an industry and sectoral developments, that is often met with resistance. And I say that from the position of people make the assumption that we're going to, when we use the word scale, scale often conjures up negative connotation, that we're going to not look after the ocean. We're going to be irresponsible. We're going to show up, create massive farms, leave pieces behind, and just, quite frankly, leverage that financial opportunity. That is far from the truth. What we know is that the ocean is a very complex place to do business. And as a result of that, we firmly believe that the ecosystem development is mission critical. It's very hard and complex to get everybody together, but we believe in the Canadian context, the opportunity and timing we have right now, where we actually have all of those actors and players involved in playing a critical role in the evolution of that industry, are at the table. And we can have those conversations. And I can assure you, some of those conversations are very difficult. There's a lot of different opinions and perspective, but that's part of the excitement, is to be able to put all of those pieces together. So ultimately, the question really is no longer, can seaweed become an industry? The question today, I believe, is how do we build an industry well and responsibly? So from the Canadian context, we believe Canada has extraordinary advantages. We have the world's largest coastlines. We have the opportunity to access three oceans. We have strong marine science in Canada. We have very significant Indigenous leadership. For the most part, we have clean waters. We have a positive global reputation in a whole host of areas, and we have existing aquaculture expertise in other areas, predominantly which has existed mostly on the east coast of Canada. Certainly, a lot of things happen on the west coast, but we lean into that extensively. But geography alone does not build industries. We know that industries are going to require collaboration, trust, investment, key to building any sector, policy. The regulatory framework is very complex. We need talent. We need people. We need students with paths into support the sector. We need infrastructure and we need a shared vision, which is really where our organization fits. I just want to go back for a minute on a couple of things. One is really around policy. Again, without knowing kind of the geographical landscape of Canada, we have diverse areas, we have provinces, different provinces have different rules and regulations, as do the federal government also gets involved. So it's very complicated to put all those pieces together, and we are working closely with those regulatory bodies to try and accelerate some of that information in a responsible way so that we can get more opportunities with farms, with nations, and to really coexist with things that are already participating in the water. In Canada, there's a lot of work being done around marine strategies, coastal protection areas, and we are part of those conversations. I personally sit on an organization with 17 Indigenous nations where we're looking at what are those opportunities, where does it make sense to farm, where we could leverage some of those opportunities. So in short, that's really our focus. And what is our role? Our mission is quite simple. We want to build the conditions that are going to allow Canada's seaweed network to flourish. And we do this really through a number of pillars. We convene, so we bring folks together, and that ranges from growers, processors, researchers, Indigenous nations, governments, investment, and entrepreneurs. No one organization can build an industry alone, and not unlike other growing sectors or sectors that are already existing. Academia, business, government, financial tend to sit independently. And I don't think that there's a lack of intent to collaborate. It is just everybody's very busy, and that's probably oversimplifying it. It's very difficult to get everybody together and get everybody on the same page, moving the same direction. So this convening, as we call it, a lot of the work we do is simply conversations. We have just a few months ago, we called it the Pacific Seaweed Summit, where we brought together with co-host a number of Indigenous nations. And we're really just facilitating conversations. But more importantly, we leave those conversations with actionable items to see where we can go to continue to build out on the sector. Our second pillar is we connect. We intentionally create relationships. We believe that innovation happens at all of these intersections that I've alluded to. And sometimes the most valuable thing we do is simply introduce two people who didn't at the time realize that they needed each other. We advocate, as I alluded to, we're working with governance to modernize regulation, to work and update the licensing, the policy, and more importantly, all of those things together will help attract the investment. And a healthy regulatory environment creates confidence for investment. And like any other sector, we know that there's going to be a significant capital play that's going to be mission critical to moving some of this forward. Before I move on to my next point, I just want to state for the record that we from the policy and regulatory standpoint, we do not disagree with any of the current policies and regulatory frameworks that are in place. Where we have a challenge from the industry side to try and accelerate the growth is the time for the government to review applications. It can take years to get going, and that's very disheartening and challenging for businesses when they're working to move things forward. We also work to accelerate the sector. And what does that mean? That means we're working with innovators. We've done a labor market study around workforce development. What are the opportunities? Can we take potentially folks that have been working in the fishing industry? Is that really an opportunity to retrain those people? Potentially. We look at the commercialization and industry and processing. What are the physical infrastructure needs that need to come together to be able to grow this in a meaningful way? And probably one of the most important pieces is really the market development. It's already, you've heard it early on from Key, we know that there are a whole host of opportunities of where seaweed can be used. And we're looking at, everything from construction materials to food to textiles to cosmetics. There's no lack of opportunities, but ultimately, is there really a market for that? Are consumers interested in that? Is somebody going to invest millions of dollars in medical research if there's not actually an appetite? We might solve a problem or be able to solve a problem, but should we really be doing that to move that forward? So part of our work is to really reduce those barriers that prevent great ideas and their ability to scale. And finally, and most importantly, from the Pacific standpoint, is to tell the story. An emerging industry, we need a compelling narrative. And people ultimately invest in stories before they invest in sectors. So just briefly want to touch on the Canadian network. So the Pacific Seaweed Association that I've talked about, we're formed, we're based on the west coast of Canada. But it's worth stating that we're not the British Columbia network. We're not the Pacific Northwest. We're the Pacific. And albeit a lot of our work is really focused on British Columbia to build those foundational pieces of the sector, we're talking with people from Alaska all the way down to Mexico, Colombia, Chile, because we believe if we can get together regionally and leverage those opportunities, we can achieve not just some of the economies of scale, but why should we be replicating all of the work everywhere? So as a result of that, we have created a Canadian network. And because we work very closely with significant Indigenous groups across the country, it is currently a network. It currently does not have a legal foundation around it. And that is by design because we are making no assumptions of what this industry could and should look like. So, with nations, for example, Indigenous leadership, we have formed a circle of champions. So, we're starting to put together as we craft and the industry starts to emerge in those discussions, we really co-create. We create co-governance models. And as the sector rolls out, we're not here making assumptions of what we think it should look like, although we may have some, is that we work collaboratively with folks to put this all the pieces together. And so that network, really, we simply believe, in short, that no single province in this country can build the industry alone. And its purpose, quite frankly, is to connect the seaweed ecosystem from coast to coast to coast. And our network brings together academia, Indigenous partners, government, investors, NGOs, and innovators. And rather, again, as I've alluded to, duplicating the work, we share knowledge, and rather than competing internally, we collaborate nationally. And the network creates visibility, alignment, and collective momentum. So ultimately, looking forward, We believe that the future of seaweed is not only about farming. It's truly about building an integrated blue economy, of which I'm excited to think that folks like yourself might be a part of. And that means for us, opportunities in advanced manufacturing, food innovation, biomaterials, cosmetics, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, climate technologies, ocean carbon, and coastal resilience. And ultimately, seaweed becomes a platform technology for multiple sectors that we can leverage. So, in closing, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts, but one specifically is that every successful industry has invisible infrastructure behind it, not just roads and ports and relationships, but we need trust, shared knowledge, investment, policy, leadership, institutions. And that's the work that we are focused on in Canada. Because when we invest in this ecosystem, individual organizations and the sector as a whole, we firmly believe can thrive. And on a side note, I would say I have to give credit to my friend who was at Oceanwise for a year. He has a saying that he uses often is that whales don't carry passports. And we try and adhere to that. And as on a serious note, we believe that Canada in our positioning is very well positioned to work together, not just here, regionally, nationally, and internationally, to build a global template of how we believe, specifically involving some of the things I've outlined, i.e., the Indigenous nations, what this opportunity really could and should look like. So, in that, I've probably taken too much time. I'm thrilled. Again, my name is Mark Smith. I'm always extend an invitation. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. Please do. Happy to further conversations, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It was wonderful presentation. I'd like to hand over the session to Key to move forward.
Thank you, Kashvi. And I must tell you, Mark, it was really a wonderful presentation. Like you spoke about everything, and I'm really waiting for the panel discussion to ask you more questions. Anyways, moving on to the next speaker. Um, our next speaker has one of the most ambitious jobs in the blue economy to make seaweed as synonymous with Scotland as whiskey and salmon. And she is remarkably good at it. Please welcome Rhianna Rees, Chief Executive of Seaweed Scotland and co-chair of Women in Scotland Aquaculture. Rhianna came to this work through research and education, holding a master's in Global Environmental History from Uppsala University. She built Scotland's Seaweed Academy to train newcomers to the industry and has been recognized with Aquaculture UK's Rising Star Award. Her current work spans the entire value chain: seaweed as food, as animal feed, as fertilizers, cosmetics, and bioplastics. She has helped launch a UK wide seaweed network backed by WWF and the UK Agri-Tech Centre. She is driving real research and development, including low energy methods for turning cultivated kelp into liquid biostimulants for farming, work that has already beaten early field expectations. She also thinks hard about the unglamorous things that decide whether an industry survives: licensing, processing capacity, and marketed access. And there is a lovely connection for me personally. Her organization has worked on a seaweed project in East Anglia, practically on my own doorstep in Norwich, where I am right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rhianna Rees. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is it possible to share my presentation?
Yeah, Please share your presentation.
I'll see if this works. Okay, you will see that. Okay. Can you see that? Okay. Any confirmation?
Yes, it is okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, thanks very much for that introduction. It was difficult to figure out sort of which angle I should take with this talk. Based on who it's aimed at, I felt like I should just give a holistic view of the seaweed sector in Scotland, my journey, how I got here, and everything else, because I feel like the conversation always happens. I always get asked, how did you get into seaweed? How did you find this? It's such a different career path, I think, but obviously maybe not for all the people in seaweed itself. So who am I? Well, I'm the CEO of Seaweed Scotland. We are the trade body for seaweed in Scotland. So I work with companies. I make sure that there's collaboration, very much the same as Mark was talking about in the previous session. So we have, for example, biostimulant working groups, we have farming groups, or seaweed operator groups, and we have the annual conference. So we're constantly trying to create events where people can collaborate more and bring the sector forward together, because it is a new sector, although I will talk about how it's an old sector as well, but it's a new sector that's essentially trying to reposition itself, recreate itself, and find a path forward. So my history, I did a degree in management science a long time ago now, and went on to work in Southeast Asia. So I ended up being a teacher actually in Hong Kong for 2 years, and then in Thailand for a year. At which I decided I was going to go back to university. I went to do my master's in Uppsala University, which has just been mentioned there. And at the time, I was doing history, environmental history, and I wanted to focus on bamboo. I thought bamboo was this really cool resource that's kind of being rediscovered. It was a weed, but now it's being used in food and clothing and all sorts of different structures, building materials, for example. But while I was at COP23, I met a seaweed farmer from Sweden who said, forget about bamboo. If you want something to believe in, if you want a sustainable resource or a sustainable biomass, you should look into seaweed. And he convinced me. He said, it's in food, it's in feed, it doesn't require any inputs. It grows incredibly quickly. It's just one of the most sustainable resources on the planet, and therefore, if you want something to feel hopeful about in a world which maybe that feels a little bit hopeless at times, this actually is the resource for you, is the career for you. So I did an internship with him. I went on to that. And then I did my whole thesis, that Seaweed is Sexy. So that looked at the whole storyline of seaweed and its historical context, which very much in the British Isles, which is where I focused on, it was seen as something that you touch when you're in the water, something that smells, something that rots on the beach. It was burnt for potash. It was used in glass making, in soap making. It was smelly. It was food that you ate in times of desperation. It didn't have that same context that it does have in Asia, where it's seen as a nutritious food supplement that's tasty and beneficial. So there were various applications through the years. Iodine is a big one. Glasgow was the iodine capital of the world for quite a while. But that obviously died out as soon as we started finding resources in Chile and in other parts of the world where we could find it mined. So always during these industrial revolutions, things tend to move away from the UK, which is what we've seen historically. So the fact that we're trying to rediscover the sector again in the UK is interesting, but it means it needs to be marketed in a much different way. It needs to be high end. It needs to be proven, essentially. So any benefits to skincare, cosmetics, nutraceuticals, they need to be high end, and they need to be well established and proven, which can be obviously quite costly. So I did all of this research. I wrote my thesis. I was very excited about seaweed, and then I came back to the UK actually at that point when COVID had just hit, and I was applying to all these different jobs, and eventually I had an interview with a housing company in London, and I was so desperate at this point for a job that I went to the interview and I was really excited. And I thought, okay, fine, here we go. And during the interview, the interviewer said it was asking me about seaweed. And during the interview, I obviously talked about what the research had done, all these applications. And she said, and she stopped me in the interview there, and she said, "Look, we've got another hour and a half. I'm about to introduce you to 3 or 4 more people." Said, "I think you'd be really good in the job, but I've never seen anyone light up the way that you do when you talk about seaweed, and I think it would be a mistake to walk away from seaweed at this point." And I decided that, yeah, in that moment, I would walk away from that job interview. And from that point on, I only focused on jobs in seaweed. So managed to work for a food company, managed to then get a job setting up the Seaweed Academy, as was mentioned. So that was a great way to train people in the sector and to let them know about some of the barriers to entry and the entire value chain, and the pinch points and also some of the opportunities as well. And then yeah, now I run the Seaweed Scotland Trade Association. So it's been a wild journey, but very excited to be here, and still representing seaweed and still feeling like seaweed is sexy and it's got great opportunities. So the Seaweed Scotland itself, previously the Scottish Seaweed Industry Association, or the SSIA, we are a trade body, which means that we represent both farmed and wild harvested seaweed, which can make it quite complicated at times. There's obviously divisions and different priorities for both sides of those things. We also represent processing, research, governance as well. So we have quite a big range of things. And not only that, we also represent all of the end uses of seaweed too. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but essentially I'm looking not only at biostimulants, not only at food, not only at feed, and all of those different end users have different policy requirements, different outputs, and so I'm working with all these different companies who might need very, very different things. So it can be complex at times. So what's the history of our sector or our organisation? Well, we were founded in 2014 to be a voice for the sector. We have been operational. We had our first conference in 2016. I was hired back in 2023 as the business development manager at the time. We created last year the Code of Good Practice, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And then this last year, right at the beginning of this year, we formed the UK Seaweed Network, and now we have our UK Seaweed Programme Officer who engages with the rest of the devolved nations. So we have obviously Scotland, which has quite a large seaweed presence, but we also have now England, Wales and Northern Ireland all working together, and all have different governing bodies as well. So it's complex in the UK, but it's very interesting, and no 2 days are the same. So here are the kind of map of operations. This is a very simplistic view, but essentially I tried to pull up all of the organisations and where they're active in the UK so you can see. So we have wild harvesting, farming, research. Wild harvesting is a little bit more difficult to pin down, because quite often they don't need to necessarily register in the same way, especially in England and Wales. In Scotland, they do have to register with the Crown Estate, so it's easier to trace them a little bit more. But as you can see, the majority of operations are here on the west coast of Scotland, which is where I'm based as well. So we have lots of research organisations there in pink, quite a few farms that have been set up and are operational. I think total in the whole of the UK, we have about 36 farm licenses that are currently operational. So what did seaweed historically used to look like? Well, as I mentioned, this kind of burning, this potash industry, it was huge. So especially on the Orkney, Outer Hebrides, at its peak during the kelp boom, which is what we call the period where it was really seen as this valuable resource. they had up to 100,000 people employed in the Outer Hebrides. Now, whether all of those were paid or not, I can't say. I think there's some contention there about whether it was legal employment or not, but it definitely was an active industry. There were court documents you can still find where people are arguing over a rock that contains seaweed on it or a bit of land, because it really was seen as a valuable resource at the time for its properties. So what are the commercial species that we have in the UK? Well, there are 650 different species of seaweed in the UK in total. We probably commercially utilize about 15 of them, I would say, but I've pulled kind of 10 of the most popular ones here. So in terms of biomass, knotted rack ascophyllum is definitely the top one. I would say this is 96 to 99% of the biomass that's harvested in the UK is ASCO, and that's primarily for biostimulants, but also used for cosmetics and nutraceuticals. Dulse is very high-end food product. We also have sea lettuce, more of an animal feed product, although not necessarily commercialized at the moment. We've got sea spaghetti, also a food. Fucus vesiculosa is more for nutraceutical applications. So any of you who have come across fucoidins before, that's a big one. And then the commercially utilized species for farming purposes are these four down here. So we've got winged kelp, we've got laminaria, we've got sugar kelp, and then we've got fir bellows or sacchariza. So those four are currently commercially cultivated. Everything else is wild harvested, but there are some trials currently happening around dulse and around sea lettuce, so we'll see. And also I thought important to highlight laminaria hyperborea, which is primarily used for alginates and hydrocolloids. So what products do you see in the UK? Well, there's quite a big range actually, and I think this is what's really interesting about seaweed is almost every other day there's a new application being tested or trialed. So we've got everything here from food, but food is typically seen as a bit more niche, artisanal, sometimes for flavouring. So we have, for example, Harris gin here, which is infused with sugar kelp. We've got crackers or biscuits infused with seaweed. You might come across a seaweed chutney here in the UK. There's also for supplements. So for example, sea moss is something that we're starting to see a lot more of now, or things that are specifically targeted. So for this example, this one here is specifically for menopause because it treats the thyroid function. So by consuming seaweed every day, this is what they argue. But this is ascophyllum. So you know, you can take from that what you will. Then we have alginate applications. So here, like linings, we have ink that was developed, we have biostimulants, nutrient shampoos are becoming more popular here. I'm definitely seeing more and more being advertised. Same thing with high-end kind of cosmetics ranges. So if you go to any spa in the UK, well, sorry, specifically in Scotland, I should say, you'll probably come across Ishka products and Ishka treatments, which are based around seaweed as well. And then even more now, we're seeing food in supermarkets. So this is from Waitrose, which is one of our high-end supermarkets, and it's dulse that's advertised for seafood primarily as a flavour enhancer. So yeah, really interesting range of products. And I think this is what we're kind of missing at the moment, is that market pool. Every single company that's growing seaweed, making seaweed, is almost trying to carve out their own market pool and try to carve out their own market interest because it's not necessarily established to begin with. So just a quick one. I thought I'd pull up a quick case study. So seaweed for food has pretty much dropped off the map in the UK in the last 2 years, I would say. So Mara Seaweed specifically, I'm going to use the example of them here. They made a range of products. Their entire model was seasonings. So they wanted seaweed to replace salt, essentially. But what they found was that they really struggled to scale, and there was an issue with the demand in the end. People didn't necessarily know how to use seaweed. It didn't necessarily replace salt as easily as it was felt it should do. because it doesn't have the same sodium content. So of course it's not going to be quite as strong. And there's being in supermarkets is very cutthroat. If you don't meet the required level of sales, supermarket big multinationals will drop you quite quickly. So while they tried, it was really difficult to maintain. There's just a real challenge in getting into these spaces. So the economics of supermarkets are absolutely brutal, and customers just aren't quite as familiar, at least in the Western palates. So there are ways potentially to get it into the food, hidden in ways, but I'm not going to go into that today. So what does the sector look like? This is just a sort of broad range of farmed versus wild harvesting. So we have quite a few different farming operations here. We have, you can see quite massive growth. We need to use things like pulley systems and quite large manufacturing methods to get this quite heavy material out of the water. And this is all very, very early days. So one of the points is that we're coming across issues with this is that price point as well. So how do we bring that price point down, and how do we make it viable? And automation and scale are two of the big things that I think we're kind of focusing on. So some of the other projects that we have done with the Seaweed Scotland, we wrote a code of good practice for the sector. So anybody who's operational should be following this code. So if they are a member, they agree to basically adopt this code that is in addition to any sort of regulations within the UK, or specifically in Scotland, I should say. So we just see it as a way of being really responsible and sustainable in operations. We also wrote a paper on the composition of Scottish seaweed, so advice and guidance on what we have found in terms of the species composition, what should and shouldn't necessarily be tested so that it's not too onerous on the individual who's testing, and trying to alleviate some of those challenges for entry into market as well. And then we also contributed to a project around seaweed for schools in Scotland. So that has just been, I'm not sure if it's been published yet, but we completed it in March of this year. And then this year, we, as I mentioned earlier, we always host a conference. So this year's conference will be in Scotland again in November of this year. A really great gathering of individuals from industry, academia, and everything. So if that's of interest, I just thought I'd put up a slide about that. And that's me. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Rhianna. That was actually a wonderful case for why seaweed deserves a place at the very center of the blue economy. Thank you so much. Lovely presentation. Now, we move on to our next speaker, who has spent a lifetime on a question most people have never thought to ask. What is seaweed actually made of? And how do we use every last bit of it? It is my pleasure to introduce David E. Myslabodski of Great Sea Vegetables in Marine. David is a seaweed and marine polysaccharide expert whose graduate work in marine biochemistry was carried out at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and whose practice spans industry, applied and basic research across the United States, Norway, the Middle East, and Mexico. His expertise is extraordinarily deep. Seaweeds as raw materials, harvesting and process development, seaweed as human food, animal feed, and as crop nutrition, and above all, the marine biopolymer, the agars, carcinogens, allignates, and fulicoids that quietly appear in our food, our medicines, and laboratories. If you have ever eaten an ice cream, taken a capsule, or grown bacteria on a petri dish, you have relied on this chemistry. And here is something remarkable. 3 decades ago, David co authored the system of nomenclature for red algal galactans that scientists still use to describe these molecules today. Papers published this year cite his work. He also advocates something close to the session's heart: how complete utilization using local species are fully and sustainably rather than wasting them. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David. The floor is yours, David.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, David. Please go on.
Let me just get share. I'm not allowed to share. I don't know what's going on. This is not working.
Is your PPT not working? If you don't mind, can our IT department share for you? Oh, we've started already. No worries.
Zoom is not allowing me to share, so what do we do?
Do you want one of our team to share?
You have a copy, that will be good.
Yeah, we have a copy, so if you want, we can share it for you.
Yeah, because I'm just blocked. Zoom is not allowing me to open.
No worries. Sumit, can you please share the screen?
I may be sharing now. Can you see my screen? Hello?
We can see your screen.
Okay, so yeah, I managed to unblock Zoom. So if you can hear me and see the screen, let's keep going. My name is David Myslabodski. I am located in a very small town in Maine. That's the northeast part of the United States, 4 hours north of Boston, 3 hours from the Canadian border. And we are happy to be here because there are several seaweed processors that they have, most of them over 50 years. We have carrageenan, we have agaros, furcelaran, kelp meal, liquid fertilizers, sea vegetables, and there is still not the size we used to have, but there is still a working waterfront, there is still fisheries. So this is nice to keep the tradition of the working waterfront in Maine. The point of the presentation, we are a little bit of a contrarian, so the message would be for the new people that they want to join the seaweeds world is to be aware of what seaweeds can, and more importantly, what seaweeds cannot do. Seaweed, somebody already said, in English, it doesn't have a good name, but not much we can do with it. In other languages, I never encountered that problem, but in English-speaking countries, what they remember is smelly seaweed on the beach, and we have to live with it. But at the same time, if a person loves eating beef, I always ask them if they have never been in the slaughterhouse. Probably not. So that will take their taste for beef for quite a while. But that's the reality of it. This is not new. This is probably the first seaweed symposium in 1950s. And today we see the exact message, can be unrealized, can be promising. The problem is that if we only talk, nothing is going to happen. We have to go down to the beach, we have to harvest, we have to farm, we have to process, we have to put the products on the shelves. If we can have a living out of it, and it's possible at all kinds of different scales, then it's good for us and it's good for the environment. Seaweeds, why are we showing a forest? This is a real forest. You can see the size. That's not artificial intelligence. That's an average size human being. Those are not the largest trees. The largest trees, I think they are sequoias in California. But the time in the forest on land, you are thinking hundreds, thousands of years, massive scale. You have the trunk. We don't see the roots, but they are also extensive. The canopies and all the life on the other stories. So the scale of forest on land, it's unique. This is not a forest. This is a tree plantation. That's a tree farm. This is man-made because we need wood, we need paper, we need pin clothes, we need timber for construction, we need a lot of different kinds of woods. Mother Nature cannot provide all of them. So we started farming trees a long time ago. The trees can be harvested in 2 years, in 5 years. And there is also a longer cycle, teak, that it's a hardwood. There is a lot of it in India. Each generation has one chance. The parents can harvest once and plant once, and you have to wait 60 years for the next harvest. But it's not 60 years that you go away and you come back and the farm is still there. There is a lot of maintenance, a lot of TLC, tender loving care. So this is not Mother Nature, this is mankind. And we have to do the best to do two things: the products that we need and the least damage to Mother Nature. And more, this is becoming important to realize that we don't need the highest yield. We need a good balance between what we get and what we do to Mother Nature. This you are going to have to excuse me. I don't remember where the picture was taken. This is kelp. We call it a kelp bed, not a forest. The time scale is very different. They grow very fast and they die very fast. They cannot accumulate the biomass that a tree forest can. They are relatively important locally, but they really don't modify the oceans. The oceans, they are very large volumes. The seaweeds are restricted to the coast for obvious reasons. They need nutrients, they need light. The kelp beds locally, yes, they are a refuge for many species. But again, the time scale for kelp beds and tree forest is very different. You can see this is not a kelp bed. This is a kelp farm. This is, again, I don't remember where the picture was taken, but this is either North America or Europe. It's harvested very soon. This is harvested after just a couple of months, maximum 5 or 6. Wild kelp can be 4 years, can be 8, maximum 20. So we make a difference between what we farm and what we take from Mother Nature, because Mother Nature is still the best farmer. And as long as we respect what we Mother Nature and we only take what we need, we are going to be doing okay. And we see seaweeds as being farmed and also harvested. They supply very different products. This is farming. This is China. This is Saccharina japonica. This is after 70 years of development. If somebody wants to learn how to farm kelp, go to Tsingtao. They are the masters. They know how to do it. They have their own cultivars. They have been modifying them every couple of years. They bring new cultivars. Originally, they had to feed the Chinese people, and that's why it was done. Today, we don't know exactly the split, but it goes for human food. It goes for alginates. And what's relatively new for China is liquid fertilizers or biostimulants. In 25 years, they went from absolutely nothing to probably the leaders, both of quality, customization, and the volume of the biostimulants that they can deliver. So it's quite interesting. If somebody wants to go and visit Tsingtao, it's a shock. It's a positive shock to see what they have achieved in China. Now, closer home to the Indian people. There is a long list of species, native. We try to find out how much of a seaweed tradition there is in India. It's a really large country, many cultures, maybe languages, many people. We could only find pockets in some coastal communities that they've been harvesting for many years. Some of it is directly as food. Some of it, they have agar processing plants. They have alginate processing plants. We are aware that today we see in the market a lot of biostimulants coming out of India. Alginates, Turbinaria sargassum, they are brown seaweeds. And the last seaweed, I have the mark, it's an exotic. Eukema, it's a long story. It's a very odd story because PepsiCo, the bottling company, that's the company that started together with one of the national science institutes in India. They have Eukema, they have farms. The interesting thing is that they invented the juice and bagasse process. So you harvest while it's fresh, you squeeze the juice goes to the farmers. The bagasse, you can still use it for carrageenan. So we don't call it the new name that people want to use as a biorefinery. We just call it multi-stream zero emission. And that has been going for several years in several seaweed sectors. Now, where is India gonna go? I mean, we are not the one, let's say, not get into too much hubris. We are not the ones to tell India where to go, but we will be happy to assist wherever India wants to go, to supply technical services so they can achieve their goals in a very short time. They have been harvesting. Can they harvesting more? It's all about assessing what's the biomass available, how much do you want to harvest. It doesn't have to be industrial. If you are a fishing community, you can go on foot, you can go on a small boat, you can harvest by hand, you can harvest with a hook, you can dry, you can eat it. If you don't have the tradition and you don't like it, that's not a problem. You can feed it to your animals, not a lot, 3-5%. You don't need a lot of seaweed meal in feed. You can use it as a fertilizer. You can put it in your crops. Or you can go all the way to agaros. You can do all kind of high value, high price products obtained from seaweeds. But then probably you need to talk with Neil Tata to give you a couple of million, because you need capital, you need infrastructure. It can be done. It cannot be done in 1 or 2 years. It takes a long time. But we are aware that India has a very special raw material, Gracilaria dura, of which is an extremely good raw material. So there is the possibility, and we haven't been able to get confirmation, but it seems that there is agaros being manufactured in India. Are you going to be harvesting for your community? Are you going to be harvesting to sell products? That's up to you. Once you have your products, that they are stable, that they are in a warehouse, what are you going to be doing with them? You want to sell them, where is your market? You can start small, you can start large. I don't know the particularities of India. It can get very complicated. It can be very simple if you are just consuming it as food, feed or fertilizer in your own community. One thing that in the Western world hasn't been followed, a lot of small farmers in the West, they thought that if they produced it, people will show up and buy it, and they are finding it a hard time. A lot of companies, they are out of business because they couldn't break into the market. So there is only so much that one person can do. If you are the farmer, if you are the processor, get somebody else hired in your community, government. I'm not sure, but I'm sure you can find the right person that can help and guide you. And if you don't have the market, you may have to do something else. Unless that's for your community, so you really don't have to have a classic commercial channel to get into the market. You are just supplying it to your own people, your own families. One thing that we don't agree is all the stories about seaweeds saving the world. Seaweeds are important. Kelp beds are very important. They are part of the ocean ecosystem, but they cannot remove and sequester large amounts of carbon. They cannot regulate the climate. There are a lot of things that we hear these days that they are detached from reality, and we consider this is just a distraction, this is just noise. And the young people, they don't have the time to waste listening to stories that they are going to go nowhere. They should be dedicated to projects that in a short time, 1 or 2 years, they will be able to have a product and enjoy the benefits of seaweed derived products. Now, somebody has already mentioned, probably many times, seaweeds, it's not about the seaweed. Somebody has to harvest. Somebody else has to farm. Probably a different person, because that requires different skills. Sorry for the sun buffing, sorry. Somebody has to process. Sales, again and again and again, unless it's for your own community, you have to get it into the market, you have to get it at the right time, you have to get it at the right price. And obviously, you need somebody to be sure that you get your money, because if you make a sale and you don't get paid, you are not going to be in business for much longer. So this is a short presentation. I wish all the young people in India good luck. There is a lot of potential, but there is a lot of hard work in order to be successful and have a larger market for seaweeds in India. That's the end. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, David. That was an excellent presentation. You talked about how kelp beds, kelp farming, and cultivars in China, the raw materials, farming, manufacturing in India. And I agree with most of you, most of the things that you said today. And thank you for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Now I give the mic to Kashvi.
Thank you, Key. Now it's time to introduce our final speaker for today's session, who studies seaweed at the scale of whole ecosystem and remind us that before seaweed is a product, it is a forest. It is a pleasure to introduce Professor Paulo Horta, a designated professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil, where he leads the phycology laboratory. He holds a PhD from the University of Sao Paulo with postdoctoral research in marine ecology at the Plymouth University of United Kingdom and the Center of Marine Science at the University of Algarve in Portugal. And he has been visiting professor at the University of Salernito in Italy. With the nearly 250 publications and more than 6,000 citations, he is one of the leading voices in the ecology of marine algae. His research reveals the world most of us never see: the rhodolite bed of the Brazilian continental shelf, living carpet of coralline and red algae that he describes as an oasis of diversity, sheltering hundreds of species, the vast Sargassum forest that build marine landscape of the South Atlantic, and the urgent question of how much carbon these marine forests actually hold as they face warming, acidification, trawling, and pollution all at once. He is also profoundly very practical. He described that the Great Sargassum bloom as a problematic opportunity, and his team work on turning the excess biomass into biofertilizer, on using ulva to clean polluted water, and on extracting valuable compound from it. He shows us that the seaweed is a habitat, it is a climate, and it is a resource all at once. Please welcome Professor Paulo Horta. The platform is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to be with us or with you all. Man, this is something very amazing. I love it, the title of the session. Everything was wonderful, wonderful. Since now, very critical perspective, what is quite important to move on, like human beings, like a very, very huge amount of people walking in the same direction. So it's very nice to listen all of you and to see that we have an important opportunity to change lives, change lives now, and I pray forever. This is in what I really believe. Can you listen me well?
Yeah, yes, sure. We can listen.
So I will share a short presentation just to present you a bit of what we are doing here in south of Brazil, where I'm working right now. We are starting a new program, a program of innovation with algae. So more than seaweeds, different species of algae can be part of our lives. So this is a bit what I will present to you. And this program is essential part of international movement that I'm fostering. I'm really walking around to present the program Marine Forest Forever. If we really want to have a fair future, we need to have our marine forests. But we have a challenge right now, and I will present you a bit of this past, a bit of our present, and a bit of what I believe can be our future. So let's do it. Well, can you see my screen?
Yeah, it is visible. We can see that.
Perfect. So when we look to South America, we need to see more than a piece of land. Here we have the first uh, evidence that human beings are seaweed dependent. Yes, more than 10,000 years ago, human beings that arrived here in south of Chile, a neighbor country of Brazil, they use it seaweed, different species. They eat it. They use it as medicines. They use it for their lives. So when we look for this young girl, we need to see our parents. We need to see our family. And as families, they are part of our culture, of our global culture. So maybe most of our countries, we forgot that, or we don't know this information that seaweed is part of our past. But they are. They are somewhere in our bloods, somewhere in our gene. The epigenetic maybe have this kind of information. Well, the fact is, well, we was uh, a community that used seaweed a lot, so that must be clear. And I think that the planet as well was seaweed dependent. So when we look to the main extinction events that we had in our past, all of them the planet recover. The planet is beautiful. We look outside, we see all these green trees, the blue sky, all that. And most of this recover process was also provided by these marine forests we have around the planet. And most of these marine forests are built by seaweeds. I have been in Geneva a couple weeks ago in an event of UN, and there I was trying to translate that if we have kingdoms in our seas, the seaweeds must be the queens just because they are really very important. They grow fast, they absorb CO2, they produce oxygen, and of course, they filter the water, removing pollutants. So they are quite important in coastal areas. They are really our forests there. They change the landscape or the seascape. So they are very important. And we in somehow we can look for the sea. This is why I'm showing this drop of water. We can look to the sea and see a big forest just because the seaweeds, the main trees we have below water, they are changing the water column, producing a kind of giant forest where each drop represent a kind of leaf. So we really have an opportunity right now, just because they changed our planet before, they provide the stability we had to bloom as civilization. So they can help us to have all these abundances we had before in our seas. I don't know how old are you that are listening me, but when I was a kid, I remember big fishes in our coasts. The water of the ocean was clean, was transparent. The dive was followed by fishes. All these things was in my past. So I hope some of you have this kind of memory too. But the question is, this planet we had, we don't have anymore. This is an image of satellites considering South America 60 years ago. We see in the left much more ice, and the color of the continent was different, more green. Now our continent is our continents, I must say, they are drying and they are warm. So we are losing ice. This is an evidence that we can see from the satellite that we have a huge job in front of us. So we need a kind of global movement. And this global movement can change things. We are trying to change things here in south of Brazil, in the Bay of Santa Catarina Island. This island is hugely polluted. Unfortunately, the bay lost the capacity to produce and keep oxygen. Regarding the urbanization without sewage treatment, and nowadays what we are facing here is the opportunity to introduce seaweed cultivation as something that can change the families, providing employees, incomes, but also can change the environment, producing a much better environment. So this is a kind of services that we must reinforce when we are planning public policies. So this scenario that I'm showing you, unfortunately, we are seeing in different countries, in different continents, fishes are dying, our ocean are dying. We are really losing regarding eutrophication or eutrophization. We are losing the capacity to host life in our seas. So for that, more than ever, we need a kind of program to restore the planetary boundaries. And I really believe that if we have a planetary movement, we can change this situation that is very complicated. I don't know among you who is in the North Hemisphere, but I have been there a few weeks ago, and the heat wave was killing people, thousands of people. So it's quite important to face that these heat waves are also present in our seas, accelerating things as salinization, deoxygenation, and acidification, and seaweed cultivation or conservation or restoration can face all these challenges, all these threats. So it's quite important right now to move on, facing this acceleration of what I am calling is a climate holocaust. The acceleration of climate change that we are observing is present in different papers produced by different authors and must be present in the next IPCC report. I think is much worse than we are describing, especially in our oceans. Just because all these climate change effects are interacting with pollution, with different sources of pollution. And all these process in a country as Brazil, I would like to listen from you what is happening in Africa and in Asia, what is happening in the global south, just because, man, we are also facing collapsed policies in countries, in cities, and provinces, in different levels of organization of our territories. We are following this kind of negationist, obscurantist movements that have a lot of power nowadays. And I really think that face this challenge with seaweed cultivation, restoration, remediation, etc., can really produce a kind of culture of care, a kind of ethic based on the care. I think we have that in many regions of our planet regarding land programs. Now we need move to the sea and produce this kind of a new interaction between human beings and environment. And I think seaweeds are the main player. We can touch them. We can care of these plants. We can really seed them in the sea, in areas where our kids can be playing, being happy. This is something very simple, but I think this is a movement that can start from inside. And this kind of nature based solutions really can provide new coastlines much more resilient, contributing a lot to the climate challenge. We really need to remove CO2 from a team in from seas to face ocean acidification. Really need to reduce methane and nitrous oxide from the atmosphere, and we can mitigate all these pollutants, seaweeds. But for that, we need policies. And now we have an opportunity. The last COP we had in Brazil, this is the report, the final report regarding global climate actions agenda. And among them, we got to introduce the seaweed or the multiple benefits of algae aquaculture to accelerate this program to face or to combat the climate change. So if we have this opportunity, each country present here can use this information to foster inside local policies, introducing seaweeds as one of the tools to produce more resilient coastal communities, for example. So just to produce you an idea of the framework of our program of innovation with algae, PR, just to let you know, PR in indigenous language means child in Brazil. And they don't, when they look for a child, they don't see just a kid. They see a piece of their hearts, a piece of their bodies walking, living. So this is what must meaning for us a program of innovation with algae, a piece of science that really can make a better future for all of us. Please try to embrace this idea. And if we have this kind of program here in Brazil and everywhere, we really can have conservation. We really can have restoration, remediation, monitoring programs, environmental education, all of that embraced when we are dealing with seaweeds. And when we say seaweed, sometimes we don't realize that we are using a word that in English is not really representative what seaweed are, just because they are not weed, if you understand me. Weed in Portuguese is something not good. And seaweed, they are really very welcome and very important, very good for all of us. So sea plants, maybe we need to translate better. they are sea plants, and as sea plants, they can represent very important parts of our day by day, our living. So yes, if we introduce after seaweed cultivation the logic of biorefineries, we can get from the same biomass different products, and with these different products introduce a kind of regenerative regenerative economy and distributive economy. In other words, we can fix the problems, we produce it, and share richness with our people. This is what I think that we can translate the PIA program, or in what we can transform this initiative. To implement this program in south of Brazil, we create the IMC Square Institute. This means in Portuguese Instituto de Ecologização de Mares, Campos e Cidades. If we translate that to English, is the Institute of Ecologization of seas, countrysides, and cities. And this is an initiative that are trying to transform ecology in a verb. I'm using to say in a intransigent verb of action, transforming ecology in solutions. So seaweeds are not just seaweeds, as you are saying the title. They are solutions. They have been solutions in our past, and I really sure they are solutions for our present and for our future. And this institute we are building with these ladies here, as you are seeing, all these ladies are farmers. They are marine farmers. They are cultivating Capaficus alvarezi. We are trying to provide them alternatives. Capaficus alvarezi is a very important species right now for our reality, but we are moving to different species. And I think with different species, we really can enrich these families with alternatives to have better lives and to help us to improve the quality of our seas and of our planet. And I think this is a kind of feeling that we must see it in the hearts of everyone around us. And this is a part of the works that we are doing in the Global Alliance Against the Hunger and Poverty. And I'm delegate here in south of Brazil in this alliance that is part of the G20 group actions. But we really need to move on and put much more effort and people and institutions in this kind of initiative, just to move from a different scale. And I think this is a meeting that I have been last 2 weeks there in Geneva, and I must say that I think this is, each country must be part of this movement. The global seaweed initiative is something that must be in our radars, must be in our agenda, and everything that we are doing there or we did there must be part of the policies that we are discussing in our countries, cities, etc., institutions indeed. So it's quite important that there we presented the Marine Forest Forever multilateral program. This idea are trying to foster the sea as very important ally to combat the climate change, the biodiversity crisis. And if we get more or less the same amount of money, if we produce a fund with the same amount of money that the Tropical Forest Forever program get, that now is reaching something around 50 billions of dollars, we really can provide financial support to the global south to implement deforestation of our coastlines. Deforestation, I mean seaweed cultivation, of course, but also seaweed conservation and restoration. We are facing kelp forest threats, and most of our kelp forests are under threat. Some areas are losing a lot of biomass and diversity, so we must run. We must find refugees. We must preserve what we still have and move for this active behavior to identify the problems with a very important tools or robust tools for diagnostic and repair. Degraded areas must be restored. Polluted areas must be remediated. And all these uh, organized in a perspective where our kids, our childs must be part of it. The schools must be part of these programs to provide an opportunity of transformative education and environmental education with practices. So this is what I would like to present you. And here we have the folder that we are distributing. So that you have here our contacts. In more information, the paper we published 1 year ago or 2 years ago is here too. So you can scan them or contact me, please. I will be very glad to share with you all these ideas and hope that we are facing a very important moment. This moment is quite important. This guy accomplished 100 years, and he said, we save the sea, we can save our world. I think I quite agree with David, but maybe I think we can save our civilization if we save the sea. But to save the sea, we must save and foster seaweed cultivation. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Paulo Horta. What a wonderful presentation and for showing the reality how climate change is affecting everything. And the most important thing you mentioned that seaweed should be represented as sea plant, not seaweed. Thank you everyone for your valuable time. Those were wonderful insight to all our speakers. Thank you, Mark, for showing us how an industry is built. Rihanna for making the case that seaweed belong at the heart of blue economy. David for lifetime science and that quietly underpins the entire field and suggestion and advice for the Indian seaweed industry as well. And Professor Paulo Horto to show that there is something like marine forest forever and to show nature-based solution to climate change. I would like to open the floor for the audience. If you have any question, please raise your hand or put your question into the chat box. I will bring you in. Do let us know if your question is for particular speaker or for whole panel. While the first question come in, a gentle reminder to keep question brief so that we can include as many as voices as possible. Let's begin. I would like to hand over the session to Key. Please move forward.
Thank you, Kashvi. Um, First of all, before moving into the questions, I just want to say that I think I'm right now with the like-minded people. I'm from a plant genetics background, but when I studied seaweed and when I studied about algae, I just fell in love with it. Like, you know, it's this plant and it has so much of potential, so much of things. And you actually, you know, it's like how can one plant do so much of things? And even after so much potential, it was called like a seaweed, a weed. Why? And that I don't know. I'm just in love with seaweed. So to be with people who are like-minded as well, oh, it is absolute pleasure. And now let's ask questions now. Thank you so much for being here. Um, so I think our first question is for Rihanna. Um, uh, I think Naomi is asking that what seaweed species do you farm with, and does your farming process contribute to carbon saturation?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the presentation, yeah, we represent organizations that farm primarily the big kelp species. So they farm winged kelp, sugar kelp, and Saccharomyces polyschides. There are some trials currently going on with Laminaria digitata and Palmaria palmata, as well as potentially Ulva as well. Our line as the trade body is nothing without scientific backing. And I think, as we discussed, obviously, in later presentations here today as well, carbon sequestration with seaweed is pretty hard to prove. It doesn't remain locked up in the same way that it does in a territorial sense, in a terrestrial sense, sorry. So, you know, if you plant a tree, that carbon is stored away for 100+ years. And that's the definition of sequestration, is 100+ years. In a seaweed farm, the seaweed degrades, it obviously is harvested, it comes out of the water. So even if it does retain carbon when it's growing, it's pretty quickly taken out of the system. And that's why, you know, people were talking about sinking it, but then we don't know what ecological effect that will have. So our line is there's not enough evidence to support any kind of claims that seaweed farming can be used to sequester carbon. There are people who are obviously claiming this, and we're trying to work with them to build that evidence base in the first place for any claims to be made. But as it stands right now, there's no evidence that I would say can prove that sufficiently. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
And I think the next question is for you as well. They're asking that uh, the question is outside today's topic, but they really want your opinion. Do you think spirulina farming has good potential in countries like Nepal? What advice would you like to give to someone who wants to start a farm as a business?
I think that's a hard one. That might be a better one for somebody else on the panel than me, because I don't know that much about spirulina, and I also don't know that much about on-land cultivation. I mean, I think spirulina is a great. It has a very clearly established market. The whole food nutraceuticals business is obviously very interested in spirulina. So I think it's got great potential. I think it's got great market entrance. Whether or not the economics work, I don't know. That's probably the first thing I would look at is, can you make money from it? And yeah, and then what do you need to grow it? Maybe there's somebody else on the panel who can come in there on that question, but that's where I kind of help.
Yeah, maybe I can help you, Rhianna.
Is there someone? Yeah, sure, Paul. Go ahead.
Yeah, we worked in UN a couple of years ago with this initiative, and yes, spirulina can be an important ally to face hunger and poverty, and just because. Well, for example, we have very cheap sources of nutrient, and we very cheap sources of nutrient using the feces of chicken or pork or cows. And anyway, different sources of nutrient can represent the fertilizers to grow spirulina. And with this biomass, we can use, of course, depending this is dependent of the source of the fertilizer, we can really use spirulina as alternative source of protein to us. So can really be very important as an alternative source of protein for small communities, or even can be a business. I have students producing spirulina right now and selling to people that don't eat meat anymore. To the veggie community, they are really eating a lot of spirulina to compensate the necessity for some amino acids. So yes, I think spirulina is a good alternative if you don't have seawater close of you.
Thank you so much, Paulo. Actually, I have another question for Mark Smith. Um, you describe uniting Canada's sector coast to coast to coast. What has been the hardest part of getting such different stakeholders to share one vision?
Thank you for that question. It's a tough it's a tough question, and I'm not sure we're there as far as putting everybody together. I mean, I think part of the opportunity and discussions are what we're trying to do is to bring everybody together to actually find some of those answers. And the reality is specifically regionally, there's everybody, there's many different insights, opinion, and thoughts around what it could be and what it should be. So I think at the end of it, I think it's not really my opinion. I just think it's critical to have the ongoing conversations and from that create some immediate action. I mean, David alluded to, we've got to get farming, we've got to get farming, we've got to get experimenting, and everything has to happen concurrently. So we need to be experimenting, we need to be innovating, we need to be finding money, and more. And one of the most important parts is ensuring that in fact there's a market and a buyer, and from the industry part, a business on the business context. But at the local level, there's a whole host of things that it's from a community perspective, that could be an indigenous community or just a geographic community where all of those, where the seaweed is just is not a new thing. I'm told by ongoing, just like Paulo alluded to, has been around for thousands of years. We talk with lots of First Nations, and they joke with me that, Mark, we've been using this for hundreds of years. So I think, not to digress, at the end of the day, I think it's about having meaningful conversations and just ensuring that it's a highest and best use case, and whether that's for local food or into a cosmetic products, that there's got to be an end result of what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. My next question is for David. You have you said that we have like a shortage of raw materials in agar and agaros markets. Is farming the answer, and which species do you think we need to use to increase the shortage? I mean, to increase the production.
Sorry. I'm not sure I mentioned that there are shortages, but there is one coming. If we look at historical data, the last crisis started in Morocco. It's one of or probably the largest supplier of gelidium for bacteriological agar and agaros. And that was really stressful. Today, the processors have a very different strategy. We are hearing rumors that they have up to 3 years of raw material already in storage. But let's assume that the crisis is going to come, and India has a very good opportunity, not only because we are aware of Gracilaria dura, that's an incredible special raw material, but if people go out prospecting, looking for different red seaweeds as a source of agar, food agar, I'm not so sure, but back to agar and agaros, be sure that you work with an industrial partner to use the right method for extraction and evaluation. But how soon it's going to happen, I don't know. I don't want to be the one that predicts a dark future, but every couple of years it has happened. For some reason, we are not aware of people trying to do some adaptation, or with today's technology, seeing if it's possible to do something with Gelidium. It's a very slow grower, can be 7, 10 years, 12 years, because they can harvest it. So it should be treated more like a tree than a brush or grass. But if somebody wants to spend some time, there seems that it's going to be a good economical return if they find new raw materials for back to agar and agaros. Food agar, China, you will have to follow. If they have shortages, go ahead. If China has a good supply, don't waste your time competing with China. Thank you.
Sure. I think we have next questions in the chat box. It's for Professor Paulo. From a research standpoint, what recent scientific developments in seaweed cultivation excites you most?
So, seaweed cultivation. I think we don't have technical limitations to seaweed cultivation. We really need to foster the selection of local species, and this will demand from us time and investments. For that, more than ever, we foster the implementation of a global program as the Marine Forest Forever to provide time and financial support to enrich all the countries, especially in the global south, to find their richness, their species that can have for their cultures, for their needs, their own solutions. For this, I think we really need to work together right now to increase the pressures to discuss this program in the next COP, the COP 31 that will be in Turkey. So, yes, I think this will be a challenge for our planet to have the seaweeds or the sea plants as the main ally of human beings to face this huge climate challenge or emergency. But one thing that I must say, after the sargassum bloom in Central Atlantic, some countries start to develop different materials using this biomass, even a kind of wood. And this stand out as an alternative, a very important alternative to sink carbon for very, very long time. So, as Rhianna said, we still need to produce much more information about the fate of the carbon that seaweed absorb. But I think, despite all the discussions, they provide so many other benefits to our coastlines and for our climate, even producing dimethyl sulfides, etc., that we must foster seaweed cultivation or forestation where we have niche available, of course. Just because we can't plant seaweeds everywhere, we need to find the right place or the right season for each species in each region, but founding these places really can have seaweed cultivation as an ally to face our socioeconomic and environmental challenge everywhere. So thank you all very much for this opportunity. Congrats for the initiative. Was amazing event. Was a very, very nice moment for me and for our group here in south of Brazil. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think the next question is for the entire panel. How do we ensure that the rapid commercial expansion of the seaweed industry doesn't inadvertently disrupt natural marine ecosystem or wild biodiversity?
I'll start.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I can speak from the Canadian context. I don't think there is in our landscape, seascape, there is the regulatory conservation, the work that's being done and the regulatory framework that's already in place here. I don't think that's I mean, it's always a concern, but I don't think, the vision of, just hijacking the ocean and commercializing it is it just couldn't happen. So again, in summary, from the Canadian perspective, I think there's guardrails already in place to ensure that that will not happen.
Can I go next?
Yes. Yes. Yes, please.
I agree with Mark, but we have to be specific. Countries like Norway, France, Spain, Canada, United States, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, you have a tradition. You are part of the working waterfront. Part of it is regulation, but part of it is that the people that they harvest, they are stewards of the ocean and they know that they have to preserve, even if it's for their own interest, that their children are going to have something to harvest. But not everything is paradise. There were cases recently in Chile that were companies, I won't mention the country, but there were companies that they were harvesting. And in some fisherman families, you show them the money and they are going to think twice because they have families to feed. So in Chile, there were some instances of overharvest of brown seaweeds for export. Chile tightened their regulations. Sorry, not so much the regulation, but having people on the ground and ensuring that the regulations are followed. But the issue is that Chile, now that has a better control, the buyers move to Peru. So whenever there is economical incentive, we have to have it from both sides. We have to have regulations, but we also have to have education to tell the fisherman, well, you get a couple of, I don't know what's the currency in Peru, but you are going to destroy the future of your family. So we have to have our ears and eyes open. And we have to ensure that there are no bad players in the field. And one risk in theory could be with India, that we have seen a lot of push and a lot of promotion and a lot of excitement. And so people may say, oh, what the heck? I want to get another $100 a month. So that could happen. Hopefully it doesn't. But let's prevent. I mean, you need the medicine before having a bad disease. So India, it's a big country. Actually, it's a humongous country, 1.5 billion people. So I don't know what are the possibilities of having a small hidden beach that somebody can harvest without the neighbors knowing. Because in tight communities, everybody knows the life of everybody else. So as long as you have a community that they are conscious, it's very hard to go middle of the night and harvest a couple of tons of seaweed and ship them out on a truck. So in general, yes, we think it's a positive outlook that we are not risking, but let's be sure that we ensure it. Let's be sure that we have the good cop with eyes open, that they are not abuses. And if there is no regulation, do it. No, get
Yeah,
get the laws in the books, and then you can really be sure that the regulations are followed.
yeah. We really need regulation and fiscalization. We need
Yeah.
people on field following what is happening. Here in Brazil, we lost the main gracilaria grounds that we had in Northeast, just because that, well, we have a regulation, but we didn't have people fiscally providing these monitoring programs to avoid the local extinction. And what happened was the local extinction. So yeah, what we are observing in the north of Chile is more or less like that, as David said. The barreteiro, the methodology that they used, they took the entire plant is producing a huge impact. Of course, open seafloor or space for new species, so they are losing their kelp forests. So, and this impact is for different generations. This will take a very, very long time to recover if we keep everything okay. And we are not keeping everything okay. The pollution, together with the warming exactly in that area, is providing the loss of niche availability. So the suitability is not there anymore almost. So we are losing the plants or the populations, and we are also losing the environmental suitability. And I just would like to discuss with ask the question: how do we ensure that the rapid commercial expansion of seaweed industry doesn't inadvertently disrupt natural marine ecosystems or
So I think your network is having some issues.
Frozen screen with Paolo.
Yeah, I think his network is having some issues. Um, mm, Actually, I have a question for Rihanna. Um, you mentioned that you've actually made food products like from seaweed, right? So commercially speaking, many consumers in many countries still find seaweed like unappealing or unfamiliar. So my question is, in the future, like for example, 10 years from now, which seaweed product you think will hit the market? And do you have any thoughts about that?
Um, that's I mean, I think in my presentation, I obviously talked about the reasons why seaweed as a food um, wasn't being adopted by the West in the same way that it has in the East. And if we're taking a global look at it, obviously the most successful seaweed food product is nori, is sushi, and that's now being adopted by the West. If you're looking at a Western part specifically and how the food industry can grow over here, in the UK and the US, I think the only way is if it's hidden almost in food products. So if we're trying to, for example, lower the carbon footprint of a beef burger by incorporating seaweed in it, I think that's great. I think consumers of beef burgers will be apprehensive if they know it's seaweed. If they don't necessarily know it's seaweed, I think we see that they're much more likely to adopt it. So you can't just change the shift of an entire culture of people overnight. It's a huge task, and I think if we do want it to be incorporated more into foods over here, it needs to be done in a bit more of an underhanded way, I'd say, or a way that appeals maybe to the food, to the taste, and if we can get it into foods in a way that tastes good and people can accept, then I think we'll start to see it adopted more.
So you're saying that I won't be able to see seaweeds in the next 5 years in Tesco or Waitrose?
It was in Tesco and Waitrose. That's my point. It's
So you
obviously
can't see.
it is still in Waitrose. I don't think it's in Tesco anymore. Maybe it is with the biscuits. You see the biscuits with a sprinkle of seaweed that I pointed to in my presentation. So yeah, that they are being adopted, but only as a slight kind of flavor enhancer or something that feels a little bit more healthy, but not necessarily the main part of the product.
I agree. I think Sarai Victor raised his hand. Do you want to ask a question, sir?
Yeah, I have a question to Rhianna. Rhianna, did you ever try it with the seaweed in the school meals, in the hospitals, the meal plan, midday meal plan, or something? Did you ever try seaweed?
We obviously have done the feasibility study, and that's what I again talked about in the presentation. The Seaweed for Schools feasibility study was looking at whether it would be feasible. There are a number of regulatory barriers and financial barriers to getting it in. It's not something that necessarily will just be adopted straight away. Seaweed itself obviously has heavy metals. Again, as part of the other report, there are heavy metals present, so picking the correct seaweed is important, getting the right nutrient profile for people, and the right motivations for it. Will kids actually eat seaweed if it's there? And they may or they may not, and we haven't done any sort of in-house trials yet, and I think that's what the next step probably is
The thing is,
try it.
that if people are trying for a biofuels from seaweed, if people are spending millions of money in seaweeds, biofuel, and we are making for the value addition products, something like agar, algae, and other products. When it comes to the nutrition, everything in the paper, but why not in the reality? It's not a big study of for the meal plan. Why nobody is implementing the meal plan? Meals, seaweed in the meals. Seaweed is not an expensive product. Seaweed is really not an expensive product. Maybe David have some history of answers. David, can you please tell me?
Victor,
Yes,
we talked about this before.
yes.
And this is the pet project that I have had for 30 years. I agree with Rhianna. Doing this in Europe, it's tough. There is a lot of regulation. There is a lot of people start with the name seaweed, but we did it in Africa.
Yeah, because
they were planning to export to France to get some Carrageenan money, and I say, Tamba, come on, look at your children, feed it to your children. They ended up with a small, I think it's a bread factory. It's a bakery, obviously run by the women. It's a very small fisherman community. The men, they go out in the boats twice a day. The women, they stay with the children. And they started producing seaweed bread. And then they call us, hey, this is crazy. I said, no, this is not crazy. Seaweeds are not protein, are not carbohydrates, are not fats. Seaweeds are things like the vitamins that you give to your children, to whatever nutrients they have, they use them better. So in India, I'm not going to go against regulations, obviously, but you may have a better chance in small communities to feed them.
David.
Now, let me finish with Rhianna. She said, I wouldn't call it hide it. 3%, 5%, you can do it very quick, you can do very little, you can do many things. at a very small level, even in households. In the United States, many years ago, maybe 100 years ago, they had Irish moss powder, Farina, in the kitchen, and they were using it as another flour. So if you start distributing whichever local flour you have to the households, you can do it. Now, my last comment, if that's too tough, you can still indirectly feed seaweed, because you feed it to the crops, you feed it to the animals, and indirectly the families are getting a better nutrition. Because this we are not talking taste, we're not talking color, we are not talking saving the ocean, we are talking nutrition from seaweeds at a very low level, 3-5%. That's all you need. Feed it to the people and let it go for a couple of 1 or 2 years, see the results, get some pilot projects. Once the neighbors see the results, they're going to start talking with each other. Whenever they go to the market or whatever, especially women, they start talking to each other. They run the small places. So let them talk, let them figure out, hey, look, your children didn't get sick in the last 2 years. So be patient, do it small scale, run with it. Thank you.
Actually, as we discussed, I already planned this. As we discussed, we already planned and we have a grizzly area. Dilus is the tested with microbiological tested and heavy metal tested. We already have some areas. Seaweed. David, we already have a grizzly area. Can you hear me? I think, yeah. So, can you hear me now?
Badly, a lot of echo.
Oh, okay. So we already have a grizzly area.
Send me an email and we keep the discussion going.
Okay.
I think we are at the end of our session, but before we leave, David, can I just ask you a final, just a small question? The nomenclature system that you created, that it is still cited in many papers published till now. Do you think this idea would have lasted? And what is your thought about it?
You are getting me with another pet project. That was supposed to be the first paper, but we never published the rest. Give me 2 minutes. Seaweed products. The most studied, it's alginate. And that happens with my teachers when I was in Norway, and I was lucky that I had them as my teachers. Alginate has incredible applications because we can read the sequence and the molecular weight. We have an almost perfect understanding of what we extract from the seaweed and how we can apply. So the first step for carrageenan and agar was to give the nomenclature, because we never had a good language. People are still using what I call the Greek tragedy, and it's a tragedy. The kappa, lambda, iota, that's not helping us because that's very limiting in how do you read the molecular structure. The next paper, we may write it before we retire, is how to use modern analytical techniques to describe the sequence of agar and carrageenan, and that will open new possibilities. So it has very, very slow to get used. We may talk with some biologists and see how they see it, because we did it from a chemistry point of view. And maybe we need a little more interaction with biologists, phycologists, to see how they can take advantage. But I think it was a good point of how do you read what Mother Nature is giving us and try to get better products. So it may take another 30 years, but we are patient.
So we'll get another paper, I guess.
Yeah, we need a second paper, absolutely.
Uh-huh. Sure. Anyways, now we are at the end of our session. Kashvi, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. And with that, we come to close not only of session 9, but of the Women Thesis Graduate Network Global Interactive Summit 2026. Over 3 days, we have traveled a very long way together. We began in the ocean of sustainability, asking how we feed the future, who owns the ocean, and what happens when water gets sick. We moved into ocean of innovation, following fish from catch to consumer, listening to what ecosystems are telling us, and building the blue economy. And today, in the ocean of discovery, we have looked beyond the plate, read the DNA of tomorrow, and discovered the seaweed was just never a seaweed. We have heard from delegates and experts across more than 40 countries and 100 institutions. Students have spoken, industry have listened, and companies have answered, which was, after all, exactly what we set out to do here. Many thanks go to Women Thesis Graduate Network and Tundil Ecosystem, to our founder, Mr. Sagaya Victor, to the organizing committee, whose work made us these 3 days possible, to my fellow host, and to every speaker who gave us their time and expertise. And all above to you, our audience, who showed up and asked questions and made this genuine conversation rather than a lecture series. The ocean connects us all together. We shape its future. Today, for being part of this, safe travel, stay in touch, and we hope we see you next year again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.